All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming out to join us tonight. Cradlepoint was kind enough to get everybody together so that we could discuss private networks. We're going to talk a little bit about LTE, a little bit about 5G, see where we go. We've also got some time reserved towards the end of the session for Q&A, so you got a great panel of expert here, so get your questions ready. We'll have a microphone passed around when the time comes. So let's do some introductions first. Karim El Malki, MulteFire Alliance and Athonet, and I'm not going to be able to do your biographies justice, so I'm just going to let you gentlemen introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your organization, your role within it, and how it relates to the topic at hand of private networks.
I hope I'm up to it. So my name is Karim El Malki. I'm president of Athonet USA and a proud member of the MulteFire Alliance that probably many of you know. And we have been for many years working in the private LTE space, and therefore all this excitement and based on this, changes from the regulatory aspects, software, cloud, edge, and so on is really what's at the heart of our company, and I hope we can give you a few insights.
Ken?
Yeah, so Ken Hosac, happy to be here. I'm our Vice President of IoT Strategy and Business Development. I've been with the company, it'll be 10 years in August. And we're really enthusiastic about the opportunity around private LTE network. I think we did our first field testing, private LTE, about a year and a half ago, involving kind of a cool racetrack activity. A lot of other companies participated in very different parts of that with our friends at Ericsson. And, but I think recently, with everything coming together on the CBRS Alliance, we're really excited about the fact that this is about to go commercial.
Florida's own Cameron McCaskill.
Yeah, I'm Cameron McCaskill. He said Florida's own because I live in Tampa, so it was an easy hike for me today. But I actually run industrial IoT business development for Qualcomm for the North American region. And most of you know us obviously for smartphones. That's what we're very famous for. But what you may not know is that the adjacent markets are really taking off for Qualcomm. And the adjacent markets for us include automotive, IoT, and a few other areas. And IoT, we're actually shipping 1 million chips per day into IoT applications specifically. Still doesn't match the numbers on the mobile side yet, but it's definitely one of the fastest growing areas in the company. And my responsibility again is the industrial side of IoT, not the consumer side. So I'm calling on the Dow Chemicals or the FedExes or UPSs of the world.
Chris Wallace, product manager at Ericsson. I've spent the last few years working really on our indoor portfolio. This is providing indoor RAN connectivity, LTE, being ready for 5G. But more recently, and I think what's really exciting to be here, especially with CBRS activities going on, is we see a shift where we're currently deploying private LTE networks and of course public MNO networks around the world. But in the US in particular, with the introduction of CBRS, we really see this a huge transformation and a lot of new opportunities to bring private LTE down at the enterprise level or the neutral host provider, in addition to our mobile operator customers. So I think we really are going to see over the next few years CBRS really transform the US industry, and then we'll see how that goes as a model for the rest of the world. And if we can leverage other spectrum, other business models to see that expand, and really just to get a goal of more 4G, 5G connected networks that are going to enable a lot of new exciting use cases.
So Chris, maybe we can start with you. Mobile World Congress this year, Ericsson on the first day held their press conference. Your CEO, Börje Ekholm, made very clear that Ericsson's plan to go to market with private networks was through their existing base of carrier customers. The contrast with Nokia is, they made it very clear that they'll certainly work with their existing carrier customers, but if the traction isn't what they think it should be, they'll go directly to the end user and sell straight into the enterprise or the industrial sector. So I think really what that kind of boils down to is how do we define what is a private network? Just because a carrier sells it to an end user, that doesn't mean that it's not private. Just because it's licensed spectrum, that doesn't mean that it's not private. So just maybe give us a little insight into why that approach.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, on the definition of the private network, I mean, a lot of it comes down these days to control. Control over the data, control over the policy, control over the devices. And that's where, we would see, we do see a lot of traction with even our traditional mobile operators understanding that there is a need to let go of some of that control. That the market dynamics are just that individual enterprises are just not accepting the same business models as they used to. So there is, in a maybe undeservedly conservative industry, there is, I think, some evidence of things moving in that direction. Sorry, the other part was the question?
Just the nature of the go-to-market strategy through the carrier as opposed directly to the end user.
Right. Yeah, so, and again, so we want to be able to bring all parts of the ecosystem together. So we'll bring, as we have try to reach out and as we're getting feedback, I think we're getting valuable feedback from enterprises, from industrial players, from the industry, that we can help bring to the mobile operators as well and help them go to market. And as always, we want to be their trusted partner.
Right, and we're not just going to talk about CBRS, but we're certainly going to talk about CBRS. Ken, you and I were just chatting over here. You're seeing a lot of interest from your existing client base around private networks. It's interesting. You mentioned FedEx, and Cameron, you mentioned FedEx, but just kind of give us a little state of the union, if you will, on where we are today with CBRS, what sort of demand you're seeing, and what you expect over the next year to 18 months.
Yeah. What's interesting is we have different enterprise customers, so you have to kind of look at what type of enterprise. We got started with what we call small footprint distributed enterprise. So these are distributed enterprises that have thousands or 10,000 locations that are really small in physical size. And they're probably not the candidate for private LTE. They're going to use public LTE. A lot of times they're using LTE as a failover connection because they have, like, an insurance agent has cloud-based applications. If they go down, they can't take new applications. So you add LTE to wired, and now you have this resilient network. That works great. But that's our original client base. Where we're seeing the actual uptake in terms of interest, POCs, demand, is with the larger enterprise locations. So at a small physical size location, Wi-Fi works great. But you get to these large, and we call these wide area LANs, like a shipping port or an airport or a large warehouse or an enterprise campus or a college campus, a smart city. So again, you're trying to create this LAN around something that is large in physical size. And a lot of the use cases that we're seeing, we're on every bus in New York City, or we power red box kiosks, or we are in police cars in Chicago, San Francisco, et cetera. Those are completely separate use cases that are not operated by the same enterprise. So now go back to this larger area. A shipping port, pretty much all the use case is the same use cases with automated ground vehicles or tugs, cranes, surveillance cameras, except they're all related to the shipping port. And so similar use cases in that wide area LAN, and the shipping port wants to be able to control that, have a better experience. The bottom line is the customers who are really interested in this are struggling with using Wi-Fi to address those requirements. And those are the ones that have the immediate need today. They're the ones feeling the pain. And I think the early adopters that we're seeing for our solutions are going to be based on those guys.
Okay, very good. And Karim, MulteFire Alliance put together a few years ago. It's cellular and fully unlicensed, but I obviously want to talk a little bit about what you all are doing in Japan right now at 1.9, but I think it might be prudent to look back a little bit, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the pathway that resulted in getting MulteFire to where it is today as you move through your 1.0 and your 1.1 specifications.
And where it will go, because I think 5G and the unlicensed version in 5G really is the evolution, right, of where we've been working. So if we step a little bit backwards, it's a very exciting time because now several things have happened. And it started with MulteFire, there's CBRS as well now. And the regulatory aspect is important. And the standardization aspect is very important because before you actually couldn't deploy on unlicensed spectrum, you couldn't have systems like CBRS where you could, have spectrum where you need it. And therefore, spectrum was a limiting factor, right? Whereby even an operator wanting to do it had the problem that, look, I can't because I'm using the spectrum for something else. There's just not enough spectrum. So independently of who's using it, there's a complete change. And this thing coupled with and this thing on its own wouldn't have made any change. But there's a massive need from the enterprise that has come up with, we've heard it before, it's security. You need something that is different from Wi-Fi. You need the control. You need the reliability. You need a system that has been completely designed from scratch, right? Although it could look like LTE and 5G, and I think sort of MulteFire goes in that direction. It's actually been designed from scratch to look like something that's more of an enterprise IT system, right? It's not a telco system anymore. It's completely different. And getting these two, and the only way to do that was thanks to some technology changes that have been happening in the recent years, which is cloud, which is edge computing, that allows you to create a completely new mobile net, something that doesn't really look like a mobile network anymore, looks like a communication platform. And therefore, what's happening in Japan, what's happening here in the US, and is all really part of a plan, right? And something that, will then end up in 5G with unlicensed, will therefore continue along this route where different players can utilize 4G and 5G networks to satisfy their needs. And I'm also very happy to say that, thanks to all these changes, actually, my company, Athonet, has received 4 of the most important prizes at Mobile World Congress, Best in Enterprise Solution, Technology Breakthrough, and so on, which is a sort of pointer to the fact that this is really the new sort of stepping ground, right? How do we use telecommunications for everything, right? For IoT, industrial IoT, we heard ports, we've done a lot of utilities over the last 10 years. We come from work on this in 10 years where there's always been a bit of a blocking, right? And the spectrum was a blocking aspect here. And things like MulteFire is what really enables all of this to happen.
Well, and Cameron, I think that's a kind of nice segue into some of the work that Qualcomm's doing right now. As it related to LTE, 3GPP wasn't going in the direction of standalone mode of operation in unlicensed, so hence MulteFire and the work that you all did. Now, as we're going through the continued development of NR, we've got some study items that I believe your colleague Lorenzo is leading that are around NRU, so unlicensed operation of the NR spec in 5 and 6 gigahertz. So can you tell me a little bit about what the outlook is there and how you see that fitting into this deployment and adoption of 5G over time? And I'm also kind of interested to get your take on what the significance is of the fact that so early in the life cycle of the standard, we're already having this focus on unlicensed.
Well, actually, I think it's incredible. I think it's frankly due in part to the success of MulteFire, laying the stake in the ground with 5 gigahertz with LTE technology. And the fact that they're actually considering standalone in unlicensed bands with 5G is actually quite incredible. It opens up a lot of new opportunities, we think. So obviously 5 gigahertz is going to be a hot topic there, 6 gigahertz. This is all looking like it's going to be part of Release 16, which Release 16 for 3GPP should get locked down in about a year, a little bit less than a year. And so then you can kind of look at historically, what does that mean in terms of chips? What does that mean in terms of products that are actually deployable? But we think that 5G technology in these unlicensed bands will be very exciting. And the fact that they're going to do without a license anchor, from the get-go in the spec is actually quite amazing to us.
And if I could just follow on that a little bit, you mentioned Release 16 coming out in maybe about a year.
Yep.
In speaking with some of your colleagues, there's a lot that you can do as it relates to industrial IoT with Release 15.
Yes.
Give us a little overview of what to expect as we move on to Release 16 and what sort of possibilities that will open up, particularly in the industrial sector.
So I want to make sure I answer the right question. Are you asking what can you do in 15 now, and then what would you be able to add on as a result of 16?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so 15, obviously, one of the things that it does is allows low latency communication. What 16 will do is what's called ultra reliable low latency communications, which would actually get us down to sub-millisecond latency and 6 nines of reliability. So at that point, now you're talking about potentially replacing industrial Ethernet and truly getting wire-like performance out of a wireless technology. But we can actually make a lot of hay with Release 15 in the meantime, and actually Release 15 is locked and loaded, and we're starting to build products for it.
All right. So Chris, I'm curious to hear from Ericsson's perspective, and I know we're jumping around here a little bit, but back on CBRS, what sort of demand are you hearing from your customer base?
Well, it's really widespread. I mean, what's good is that, I mean, it really has spurred some innovation in the industry where mobile operator customers are looking for it as spectrum expansion, right? It's an easy way to get access to more prime real estate in that 3.5 gig. So it can be good for outdoor coverage, it can be good for indoor coverage. Looking at that with carrier aggregation on their license bands, that's certainly a strong area that's being promoted. Neutral host, so venues being able to create their own, instead of a Wi-Fi network, or sorry, in addition to a Wi-Fi network, really, they'd be creating private networks and then possibly wholesaling that out to other operators coming in or to other applications that want to be able to use that. But on the industrial side, I think is where they're coming from a legacy of not using wireless for many of the applications that they now see as being possibilities. So there might be a Wi-Fi network in the building, but it's not trying to do mission critical machine control because it just is not capable of that. They would like to do scalable video telemetry, video monitoring. In fact, one of our proof of concept trials in one of our own factories will be using that for augmented reality inspection on PCBs, on components. So in order to speed up the ability to troubleshoot faults and do quality inspections, that's never an application that has been able to be realized. So it was never even in their vocabulary. Where now we're starting to see in those industrial spaces a lot of these new use cases becoming thought of and being considered. And who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. And CBRS with LTE in the short term is now finally coming to market where we can start to do proof of concepts, we can start to do real commercial deployments later this year, and then use that learning to springboard as to how 5G is going to enable even more. It's like when 3G networks came out, and for smartphones, people didn't know what a smartphone was, right? The ecosystem of what do I do on a smartphone other than make a phone call just wasn't really there. But over the life of 3G, we had a lot of learnings that led into the 4G standards, including license-assisted access, with the tethered LTE access, and now we've taken those learnings into the 5G standards as well. So I think that'll be very important to start getting those learnings with industrial players and the new markets that CBRS is going to open up so that we can then leverage those into release 17, 18, or the future evolution of 5G as well.
I'm curious, as you go through these engagements and go through the proofs of concepts and the trials, how much of the actual technology management is going on within the enterprise or the industrial as opposed to being pushed over to Ericsson or other ecosystem stakeholders? And I guess to say that another way, to what degree of sophistication are you seeing within these companies that know they would like to use CBRS, but do they have the appropriate competency already in place to do that effectively?
Well, it's been very clear, the feedback is very clear that to be successful and to have a compelling product, you cannot rely on having that competence in the enterprise. It's just, it's not their core business at all. And even if they have years of experience managing a Wi-Fi network or other wireless technologies, IoT technologies, that doesn't really translate into managing an LTE network. Now, luckily, the evolution of cloud, of edge computing, of being able to simplify deployment of any kind of equipment and offload equipment from the user premises up into the cloud, providing analytics. So we leverage the analytics work we're doing with mobile operators and 3G and 4G networks to be able to build in automated analytics so that the system can self-diagnose and self-optimize, self-deploy in ways that a few years ago we just wouldn't have been possible. So the advancement of the cloud allows us to provide very, very simple user interfaces and user flows that match the industrial processes, not an IT process, not an LTE networking process, but I've got a new machine. I want my machine on the network. So take it from that user's point of view, and what does he want to do? Previously, you'd have to run some cabling and hook it up and plug it in. Well, okay, now maybe he goes to the UI, he clicks add a device, he puts the SIM card in the SIM burner, puts it in the slot, and the machine's up on his network. It has to be that simple. We think anyway, and the feedback we've gotten is that it has to be that simple, and you have to rely on a very low level of competence in the enterprises for this to really scale.
And Ken, Chris touched on this a little bit, but as we move towards widespread commercial adoption of CBRS, we're kind of going in lockstep with deployment of 5G. So what do you think that kind of transition looks like?
I guess from private LTE to 5G?
Yeah.
I think, this was a big discussion topic 3 weeks ago at the CBRS Alliance meeting in Charlotte. How do you set realistic expectations with enterprises that want to deploy today for how this gets upgraded to 5G? And there's also a really important thing for anybody involved in 5G is how do you make sure that you focus on the future and the benefits, but 4G today, today you need 4G. That's gigabit LTE, and it's kind of the path to 5G. So I think within the CBRS Alliance and private LTE in general, there's a lot of discussion knowing that eventually you will have 5G networks. They will require overlay hardware. In some cases, some of the folks may be designing their solutions to be software upgradable. But it's really something that if you have a use case today that benefits from private LTE, and again, if it's a situation where Wi-Fi isn't adequate, it's a good way to address that today. But knowing that the same people who are providing those solutions are going to give you that path to 5G. So I think the bottom line is we all see what 5G, where it's coming, what benefits it's going to have. I think the solutions are going to lag a little bit. I think really the 4G stuff is going to be around for a couple of years for early deployments.
And Cameron, did I hear you correctly? 1 million IoT chips a day?
Yes.
You specifically called out the automotive vertical. Where else are these chips going?
That's separate, by the way, from the 1 million per day. In the automotive space, where we're having the most success in terms of driving incremental revenue for Qualcomm is through infotainment. I mean, we've been there from a telematics perspective for years, but a lot of the new infotainment designs coming out, and pretty much all the major car manufacturers are starting to use Qualcomm inside. But no, the IoT side, frankly, today most of the volume is consumer IoT. Guys like iRobot. But we're seeing a significant pickup on the industrial side in terms of interest level as well.
Any particular verticals within industrial sector that are, early adopters really kind of leaning into this?
For specifically private LTE? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say logistics and shipping has been an area that, is definitely ready to adopt this technology. Transportation is another industry. Retail, believe it or not, and warehouse, even the warehousing and distribution side of retail. So those are, I would say, the areas that we're seeing the most interest at Qualcomm.
Okay, and those are all kind of complementary, right? You basically described a supply chain, right?
Yes.
Transportation, logistics, yes. Retail. Okay.
Yes.
Very good. And Karim, we glanced past it, but I want to circle back. What MulteFire is doing in Japan is quite interesting. It's maybe not gotten as much press as warranted, but maybe you can just give us an overview of how that is being used in the Japanese market in the 1.9 band.
Yeah, so, I mean, we were talking about 5G, and, there's no real need to wait for 5G. And Japan's adoption of sort of the MulteFire is a proof point on 1.9, which is once again, communications within a local area, right? Consider that as a wireless PBX replacement, right? If you think from the past, it could have been what was like DECT in Europe, right? Having those kind of frequencies in Japan to be able to do local control from your voice applications to your controlling devices and so on within an enterprise is really a major change, right? And therefore, the point is we don't need to look forward to 5G. These things are already in place, already running, and the change is happening.
And so, Chris, I guess now I'd like to get a little more into specific type of use cases that you're all seeing within your various companies. So as it relates to private LTE, not specifically CBRS, but just private networks, where do you see the early adoption coming from? How's it being used? What kind of results are you getting? What's the feedback?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's nothing new. Have been deploying private LTE networks in licensed bands with licensed operators all over the world. There's many European examples. Southern Link here in the U.S. is probably a great example. That's sort of utility and energy sector. And we're really proving out a lot of use cases about high reliability and low latency to detect events like line drops. A line comes disconnected from the pole, to be able to detect that and signal it back to cut off that power before it becomes safety hazard, both to human life safety, causing brush fires, and all things like that. So we're already seeing private LTE networks being adopted in those sectors. Mining sector, we have integration partners like Ambra who are deploying connectivity solutions for private LTE in mining. But what's common among a lot of these is you'll see a lot of large systems, port authorities and large open mining areas that are either sort of remote from other licensed spectrum users, or where the licensed spectrum owner is actually kind of has control over those assets that they're providing the connectivity for. But what we're seeing now really is the change with 3.7 gigahertz unlicensed spectrum, or not unlicensed, but for industrial uses in Europe, being used in some countries, and CBRS in the US, is we're seeing that same model now starting to scale down. And that's, the verticals we're seeing there, some of the same logistics, warehousing, and but also in manufacturing. That's where I think the 5G carrot gets hung out there on ultra reliable low latency, and then they see things, well, okay, I've got, or maybe I don't have them yet, but I want automated vehicles in my factory, or I want to, they go on YouTube and they see the Amazon, pictures of the robots, running around and doing things, and they can see the benefits of that. It looks very futuristic, but it's not all that far in the future, and they know that they need to start investigating and understanding the technology so that, when it becomes a little bit more mature, that they're not left behind, where their competitors have got a competitive edge, become more productive, had higher safety or productivity due to taking advantage of this. So really, again, where we're seeing it from, the big heavy industries, energy, utilities, mining. Now we're starting to see things really explode in the smaller sectors. Warehousing and manufacturing is particular areas that we're trying to focus on.
Hey, Chris mentioned 3.7. You and I were chatting about the demand that you're seeing out of the German market. I thought that was kind of interesting and maybe worth mentioning, but they set aside that spectrum specifically for private networks for a lot of their huge industrial companies that are based there. But what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was actually some Ericsson counterparts in Germany that really started talking about this at Mobile World Congress Americas. I mean, from our standpoint, we're not developing special SKUs or special products specifically for like a band 48 or something. We're basically adding those to our standard product. So this is what we've done with FirstNet, for example, adding FirstNet support to our gigabit LTE routers. That's how we're handling CBRS band 48, is adding it. So as long as, from the standpoint is if it's in, and we use a lot of Qualcomm chipsets, so if it's supported in that chipset and our module providers are making that something that's standard, we'll go do the additional testing to bring that in. So as we get requests from, like what you had talked about in Germany, the first thing we do is, do our modules support it? And if so, we'll go look and see, are there any special regulatory things that we have to do? But the bottom line is the requests are early, but if you look at Industry 4.0 and some of the things that are driving those requests, I think the fundamentals are there. These are, what we look at is, these are low data decisions as to whether we support some of this, but if it makes sense, it helps us come to the conclusion that we do need to support these. So.
Okay. So Karim, we kind of have talked a little bit about why MulteFire started, how 3GPP is approaching NRU. So looking forward, what do you see as the role of the MulteFire Alliance, given that the standardization work is now being done through 3GPP as opposed to being pushed by MulteFire Alliance? What are some of the priorities going forward? What is the Alliance interested in?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer it, but I'll give you my view. I think that without MulteFire, we wouldn't be here today at this stage, because the idea of actually running a standalone private network really wasn't there before. I mean, we tried many, yes, working with operators, bit of spectrum here and there, but this has been a game changer. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. We still need to, we still need to see it to the end to get unlicensed, working in 5G. And that, I think, is a very important role. It's still quite a lot of work that MulteFire must do there. And work with the partners, Japan, XXGP Forum, that is working on this in Japan, and other places where we can actually get this concept through. Because the problem, as we've seen, right, is spectrum, right? The lack of availability of spectrum, being able to run these systems on a license has been conceptually a fundamental change driven by a lot of companies. I'm a proud member of, but other companies here have been, have actually kicked this off, launched it, and in particular, Qualcomm. So I think there's still quite a lot of work to do. I think the CBRS is interesting, and maybe the MulteFire idea really, I think, kicked off a lot of thinking on this in this area, and I look forward to this kind of thing happening in multiple countries. And also working with the participants, working with the markets to explain this concept. I mean, it's still a new concept. When still we get problems when we go out and we say, do you know that it is possible to deploy these private LTE networks? Here are your options. There's still quite a lot of work to do there because people don't expect it. The next question is, okay, but which is the operator? Is the next question that I get all the time, right? And no, it's not. Do you know about MulteFire? Do you know about the CBRS Alliance and so on?
So Cameron, I mean, Qualcomm's an R&D machine. We've talked a little bit about the trajectory that we've got going on with the standardization right now. We've talked a little bit about the fairly well-articulated, well-understood use cases that we expect to be, kind of hits early on here. What's the, where's the room for innovation? Is there any kind of unexpected type application that you see out there on the horizon that we might not have discussed already, but where there really is room for investment and for results?
Gosh, that's a loaded question. So, I mean, yeah, we spend billions of dollars a year on R&D, and we're looking at stuff all the time. I think, I'll tell you one that really intrigued me. More and more companies are wanting to leverage what we call XR, but it's augmented reality and virtual reality, right, kind of combined under XR. But the reality is that with these big giant goggles on your head, yes, there are applications where that's fine, but there's a lot of applications where you like for it to be, something that looks more like a pair of regular glasses. And with this ultra reliable low latency communications that we're developing through the Release 16 in a year or two, we see that you could actually have the computing somewhere in the room, right? And then the glasses could truly look like just a regular pair of glasses, and you wouldn't have this big giant thing on your head to be able to do these types of applications. Because if you can get sub-millisecond latency from your eyes to that little thing, you're not going to see any problems in terms of when you move around or when you turn your head and things like that. So that's one area of application that we think is going to be really interesting.
All right. Well, that's you're waiting for that form factor to change. It's not always going to be a square rectangle or a black rectangle, right?
Yeah. I think most thing is the unexpected nature, is that we don't know what it is because
That's fair.
It hasn't been invented yet, right?
That's fair.
And you go back 10 years, even when the iPhone was invented, could you foresee there would be, there's an app for everything, right? And it's changed transportation and Uber and Lyft and ride-sharing companies, and it's changed accommodations in hotels with connectivity and mobile connectivity. So once you start to engage very creative people in these other industries who have maybe never had haven't had a good think about how wireless connectivity can improve their businesses and can improve safety, vehicle safety or operational safety and workplace accidents. It could really transform those, and that's what we're banking on, is that a lot of smart people are going to start to see this technology, see what it can do, and that's going to give them the ideas that, again, we can't even imagine because we're not there yet.
Well, we're getting up towards the end of our time, so let's take some questions. There's a past microphone that's going to come around. Show of hands, anybody have any questions? Yes, sir, here in the front.
Waiting patiently.
Thank you, panel. Very good conversation. Mark Ganzi, Digital Bridge, Digital Colony, just acquired Zayo. 30 plus years, veteran of the industry, as myself, has said that the 5G build-out will take 10 years. And the commercial real estate market is aggressively looking at the private networking as a way to monetize, just as they did back in the 90s, putting antennas on rooftops. And the expertise, obviously, is not in these organizations, so hence the new role of the MSP, the Ericssons, the Nokias, the Fujitsus, and a lot of new companies coming online to do this. So the POCs that you're talking about are great. Japan, these countries, geographically, they're small when it comes to geographics. But on the commercial real estate side, are you going to be competing, Ericsson, with your telco companies for that cannibalization or monetization of that data in that building where the property owner wants to participate, these real estate investment trusts, who 3 years ago didn't know anything about this. But today, Cushman, Tishman Speyer, all the Fibers in Mexico are all over this, trying to figure this game out. So in a way where the CapEx has come down from telcos globally, shared infrastructure where you actually have a pod in the building with an internet exchange 5, 10 years out, okay? So how is the Nokia, Ericssons, and those companies going to position themselves where they currently are generating revenues from their telco posts? Thank you.
So I mean, I don't speak for all of Ericsson, I guess, but I will now. But I mean, you know, the primary thing is we want to see the networks deployed, right? We want to see the wireless, that's the primary thing. And we're an equipment vendor. We like to sell equipment. We like to sell services around that equipment.
You're more of a services company 10 years from now, correct?
I can't predict whether that's the case or not. But I wouldn't say that, you kind of implied that we would be sort of going after these markets in competition with the MNOs. I don't think that's our strategy. I think we primarily want to help our existing customers grow their businesses and show value to them so that they can get the business. If that doesn't work, then I would see there would be other possible channels to market in order for us to sell those networks and have those networks deployed. If it turns out that the MNOs were not the right, were unable to address the market, and I think that would be something that. But I don't see that that's Ericsson becoming the network provider or taking the data. I think if we're building the networks and providing services and that around it, whether we become a bigger services company in 10 years, honestly, I have no idea. But.
The industrial space, right? Do you see private LTE being more prominent in the near term, playing in the carpeted space, carpet enterprise space in terms of business models and use cases?
I mean, I'm the black sheep in the family. I'm in tech. My whole family is in commercial real estate. My father's a real estate developer, builds commercial buildings. My brother's a broker. So, I don't think anybody here would argue about the use cases and whether it's beneficial. I mean, the building I own is more like 10,000 square feet. It's not 50 stories. I think it's going to be completely dependent on the type of property, who owns the property, and I don't think we know who's going to manage those networks yet. My personal observation is I'm watching who's coming to the CBRS Alliance, because those are the people that are actually interested in figuring this out. This is a land grab right now. Yeah. And so we don't know who's going to operate them. But it is very interesting to me that when I go to the CBRS Alliance, it's not just tech providers, but there's a lot of real estate guys, there's a lot of managed service providers, people that manage networks, not like MNOs, but people that operate building networks for HVAC and for elevator controls, other stuff. So the answer is we don't know, but if you want to know, there's definitely a lot of interest in that. And to your question on the carpeted, absolutely. It's just a question of which use cases are going to go the fastest. And again, my observation there is the ones that are, there are going to be those use cases where they're trying to figure out how can I make the next $1 billion, but there's a lot of use cases where I have a problem today. Wi-Fi's not addressing it. If I have 500 cameras in a warehouse, there's no way I'm going to boomerang all that to a public network. The carriers don't want it, and the enterprise doesn't want to pay for it. But I have a metal building, a metal warehouse that's reflecting all, there's a lot of interference, Wi-Fi's not cutting it. Those are the people that are going to buy it today as soon as it goes commercial. And then sorting out who operates the in-building networks, who buys PALs, things like that. We're going to see how that plays out over the next 5 years, but we don't know today. So, all right.
Anybody else? Yes, sir. If you'll wait for the mic, we're trying to capture the audio.
Thank you. This is the second year for the MulteFire Alliance here at Connectivity Expo and the first year for CBRS. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the biggest surprises learned so far by you all?
Well, I actually met you because our booths were across from each other last year at this show, or when it was in Charlotte. The key for early adoption between MulteFire and CBRS is do the LTE modules support it yet or not? And with CBRS being in band 48, and there's a lot of modules that support it, I think that's why that's been taking off. It's not which is better between CBRS Alliance and MulteFire, it's which ones are actually available today. And so my biggest surprise is how fast the CBRS stuff has gone. If you were to ask me this question at this conference next year, or maybe 2 years from now, if MulteFire or 3GPP can pick up that and do the standalone operation in unlicensed spectrum, I think that has the potential of taking off just as fast. But my surprise is how fast the interest has exploded. I think everyone realizes this is about to go commercial, and we had one of the FCC commissioners was at the CBRS Alliance 3 weeks ago in Charlotte, and the U.S. is positioning this as a historic event. I mean, they're talking about U.S. leadership in the world, a model for spectrum sharing, all of this stuff. So it's very surprising to me how fast it's taken off. And I think when you start to see this beyond RCR Wireless and kind of the trade magazines and the publications that we read, when you start seeing it in the national media next month or in July, I think that's where a lot of people are going to be surprised at how fast this took off.
I'd say, I mean, from having lived the CBRS adventure for a couple of years as product owner on some of our radio products, I've been surprised at the breadth really around of the number of different parties that have been interested and the different applications that we're starting to see. That once we go commercial, we'll see in like rural areas and wireless ISPs using for fixed wireless access. We'll see mobile operators using it as spectrum augmentation. We'll see private enterprises, individual private enterprises. We may see a disruptive player come in and start to build public access CBRS networks based on other, bundled with other internet services. So to me, it's really seeing that instead of it being sort of a little niche market where a couple of industries would be playing, we've really seen the interest take off among people in the CBRS Alliance that would never be in the same room before because they were different industries and different agendas and so on. But I think everybody sees the opportunity, and it is, I mean, somewhat historic. Maybe not to lay it on too thick, like a commissioner might, but that it is. It always has been kind of seen as an experiment to spur innovation and something that is unique in the world in a lot of respects. And it will be interesting to see, if it does generate a lot of new opportunities, a lot of new innovators come into the market. It is very possible that other jurisdictions will look at doing something similar to, or work harder to free up spectrum in some areas and make it available to a broader context that can take advantage of it.
All right, well, I think that distant steel drum music is our sign to wrap it up. But I want to thank everybody for your time and attention. Round of applause for our panelists and for our sponsors and Cradlepoint.